The black waitress brought the man a glass of water, and the billionaire CEO saw the necklace around her neck and gasped. It belonged to my daughter. Before we discover the incredible story behind this simple piece of jewelry, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and be sure to subscribe for more heartwarming tales. The sleet didn't just fall, it attacked. Each frozen pellet was a tiny fist thrown by the wind, hammering against the thin glass of the Greasy Spoon diner. Outside, the world had vanished into a swirling vortex of white and gray. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and despair. For Ilara, the two were becoming indistinguishable. Her feet ached with a deep, grinding pain that radiated up from the worn-out soles of her shoes. It was a familiar ache, the constant companion of her double shifts, but tonight it felt sharper, colder, a physical manifestation of the dread coiling in her stomach. The diner was nearly empty, populated only by ghosts and regrets. Old Mr. Abernathy nursed a single cup of coffee, his rheumy eyes fixed on the storm as if daring it to take him. A pair of truckers huddled in a corner booth, their low murmurs a gravelly counterpoint to the howling wind. And there was Mr. Henderson, her boss, polishing the same spot on the counter for the 10th time, his scowl deepening with every flicker of the overhead lights. The diner's neon sign, a cheerful fork and spoon, was on the fritz, sputtering in the gale. "Es un," it read, then went dark, then buzzed back to life. Spoon, es un. Too soon, Ilara thought. Too soon for the rent to be due again. Too soon for her son Leo's medicine to run out. Leo was the reason for the second pair of socks she wore, a futile attempt to ward off the chill seeping through the cracks in her shoes. He was home with Mrs. Gable from next door, his small body racked with a cough that echoed in Ilara's memory with every gust of wind. The doctor said it was just a bad cold, but in their drafty apartment, a cold was a siege. It meant another day of missed work for her, another dip into savings that were no longer there. The eviction notice was folded in her pocket, its crisp edges a constant, cruel reminder of her failure. It felt less like paper and more like a shard of ice pressed against her skin. Then, the bell above the door chimed, a harsh, discordant sound against the storm's fury. It swung open on a blast of frigid air that sent napkins scattering. 5 men stood silhouetted in the doorway, their forms massive and dark, seeming to suck the very warmth from the room. They were clad in heavy, snow-dusted leather, their faces obscured by beards frosted with ice. They looked less like men and more like mountain predators driven down by the storm. The truckers fell silent. Mr. Abernathy shrank into his coat. Mr. Henderson's hand froze on the counter, his face hardening into a mask of suspicion and distaste. He shot a look at Ilara, a clear, unspoken order. Get rid of them. The men stomped the snow from their heavy boots, the sound like falling rocks in the tense silence. The leader, a man with silver-streaked dark hair and eyes the color of a winter sky, slowly pulled off his gloves. His gaze swept the room, calm and assessing, before landing on Ilara. There was no menace in it, only a profound weariness. She saw the deep lines etched around his eyes, the exhaustion that clung to him like the cold. She saw not a threat, but men beaten down by the same storm that was beating down on her. Her heart, already heavy with its own burdens, felt a familiar, foolish pang of compassion. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, a sound like grinding gravel. "We're closing soon," he announced to the empty room, his voice tight. Ilara ignored him. She ignored the fear that pricked at her, the instinct for self-preservation that screamed at her to obey her boss. to not make waves, to keep the job that was the only thing standing between her and the street. Instead, she picked up a pot of fresh coffee and 5 clean mugs. She walked toward the men, her worn shoes silent on the linoleum. Their eyes followed her, wary and surprised. She could feel Mr. Henderson's glare burning into her back. "It's a bad night to be on the road," she said, her voice softer than she intended. "Please sit. Coffee's on me." The leader's eyes, a startlingly clear gray, met hers. For a moment, he just looked at her, and she felt an odd sense of being seen, not as a waitress, not as a tired woman, but as a person. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The tension in his shoulders seemed to ease. His companions, following his lead, moved toward the largest booth in the back, their movements economical and quiet. They shed their heavy gear, revealing worn jeans and faded flannel shirts beneath the leather. They were just men. Cold, tired men. Ilara poured the coffee, her hands steady despite the tremor she felt inside. The rich, dark aroma filled the space between them, a small truce against the cold. She saw their hands, calloused and scarred, wrap around the warm mugs. It was a simple act, a basic offering of comfort, but in the charged atmosphere of the diner, it felt like a rebellion, a quiet, determined stand for decency. And Ilara knew, with a sinking feeling in her stomach, that it was a stand that would likely cost her everything. The men drank their coffee in silence, a palpable gratitude radiating from them that was more eloquent than words. The leader, who the others called Stone, watched Ilara as she moved through the diner, refilling Mr. Abernathy's cup, wiping down a table that was already clean. He saw the way she favored her left foot, the subtle wince she couldn't quite hide. He saw the frayed cuffs of her uniform and the quiet dignity in the set of her shoulders. There was a story there, one of hardship worn with grace. His gaze kept drifting to the simple necklace she wore. It was a small, polished riverstone, a deep gray swirled with a single line of white quartz strung on a simple leather cord. It was a child's creation, imperfect and yet beautiful. It stirred something in him, a ghost of a memory he couldn't quite grasp. "We'll take 5 cheeseburgers," Stone said, his voice a low baritone that cut through the diner's oppressive silence. "And fries." Ilara nodded, grabbing her notepad. "You got it." Mr. Henderson stormed over from the counter, his face flushed with anger. "The grill's off," he snapped, not looking at the men, only at Ilara. "I said we're closing." Ilara's heart plummeted. "But Mr. Henderson, it's not even 9. And the storm—" "I don't care about the storm," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "I don't want their kind in here. Look at them. They'll scare off what little business we have." Ilara looked from her boss's pinched, fearful face to the men in the booth. They weren't doing anything, just sitting quietly. But their presence was an affront to Mr. Henderson's narrow world. "They're just customers," Ilara whispered, pleading. "They're cold and hungry." "And you're fired if you serve them," he concluded, turning his back on her to make a show of wiping down the espresso machine. The finality in his tone was absolute. The choice was clear: her job or her conscience. Ilara stood frozen for a moment. The weight of Leo, the rent, the eviction notice, pressing down on her. Then she took a deep breath, walked to the grill, and turned it on. The sizzle of the burgers hitting the hot surface was the loudest sound she had ever made. The sound of the bell on the door cut through the air again, but this time it wasn't the wind. A man in a cheap, wet suit stood there, shaking a small umbrella that did little to protect him from the deluge. He was a small, rat-like man with darting eyes that immediately found Ilara. It was Mr. Silas from the collection agency. Her stomach turned to ice. He slithered over to the counter, pulling a sheaf of papers from his briefcase. "Ilara," he said, his voice oozing a false sympathy that was worse than any threat. "We missed you this month, and last month." He spread the papers on the counter for all to see. The red ink of the past due stamp seemed to shout in the quiet room. "I know things are tough," he continued, loud enough for the truckers and Mr. Abernathy to hear. "But Mr. Henderson can tell you, business is business. The landlord isn't running a charity." Humiliation washed over Ilara in a hot, sickening wave. She felt every eye in the diner on her. Mr. Henderson looked on with a kind of grim satisfaction. This was the proof he needed, the justification for his prejudice. She was trouble. "I'll have it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I promise. I just need a little more time." "Time ran out last week," Silas said, tapping a finger on the eviction notice. "You and the boy have until Friday. Then the marshals come." He packed his papers away, giving her a thin, predatory smile. "Have a nice night." He scurried out as quickly as he had come, leaving a puddle of melted sleet and a thick, suffocating silence in his wake. Ilara stood paralyzed, her world shrinking to the mocking red letters on the paper. Friday, 2 days. Mr. Henderson seized the moment. "See," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "This is what I'm talking about. Drama. I run a respectable business." He pointed a trembling finger at the door. "You finish with them," he gestured to the bikers, "and then you're done. Clean out your locker." The words hit her harder than the storm. Fired. Evicted. It was over. She had nothing left. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She squared her shoulders, plated the 5 cheeseburger platters, and carried them over to the booth, her movements slow and deliberate. She set them down carefully, her hands shaking so badly she was afraid she would drop them. As she placed the last plate on the table, Stone's hand gently covered hers, stilling its tremor. His touch was surprisingly warm. "Ma'am," he said, his voice soft, "are you all right?" The simple, kind question was her undoing. A single tear escaped and traced a hot path down her cold cheek. She quickly wiped it away. "I'm fine," she lied. "Enjoy your meal." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "That necklace," he said, his gaze fixed on the simple stone at her throat. "Where did you get it?" The question was so unexpected it caught her off guard. She instinctively touched the smooth, cool surface of the stone. "It was a gift," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "A long time ago, there was a girl, a teenager, no older than 16. She came in here one night, scared and hungry, running from something. She had nothing. I didn't have much either, but I gave her a hot meal and the last $40 I had in the world for a bus ticket to anywhere else." She paused, lost in the memory. "Before she left, she gave me this. She said she made it herself. She called it a lucky stone." Stone, Marcus Thorne, felt the world tilt on its axis. The ghost of a memory sharpened into a painful, vivid image. His daughter, Lily, sitting on her bedroom floor, a leather cord and a small gray stone in her hands, her face alight with concentration. He remembered the fight, the awful, unforgivable words they had thrown at each other. He remembered the empty room the next morning. For 2 years, he had searched for her, pouring his fortune into a fruitless hunt, his life a hollow shell of grief and regret. When she had finally called, she had told him about the angel she met in a diner during a snowstorm. An angel who gave her the bus fare that had eventually led her to a shelter, to help, and finally, back home. "She gave me her last $40, Dad," Lily had told him, her voice full of wonder. "She didn't even know me. She just helped." They had reconciled 2 precious, beautiful years of forgiveness and healing before the heart condition she'd had since birth had finally stolen her from him. In her last days, she spoke often of the kind waitress and the lucky stone she had given her. "Find her, Dad," she had whispered. "Thank her for me." For the past year, Marcus had been searching, visiting every greasy spoon and roadside diner he could find, a quiet, desperate pilgrimage. And now, here she was, the angel. Ilara, his voice, when he finally found it, was a raw, choked whisper. "That girl, Lily, she was my daughter." Ilara stared at him, her mind struggling to connect the pieces. The intimidating biker, the runaway girl, the simple stone necklace. It didn't make sense. Before she could process the impossible revelation, the diner's lights flickered violently and died, plunging the room into near-total darkness, illuminated only by the emergency exit sign's eerie red glow and the swirling white of the storm outside. The generator sputtered and failed to catch. Mr. Henderson let out a string of curses. "That's it! Everyone out! We're closed!" He yelled into the darkness, his voice tight with panic. He fumbled for a flashlight, its beam cutting a frantic path through the gloom. "You," he pointed the beam at Ilara, pinning her in its harsh glare. "I told you, you're done. Get your things and go." The finality was brutal. To be cast out into that storm, with no job, no money, and soon no home. It was a death sentence. A quiet despair, colder and more terrifying than the blizzard, settled over Ilara. She didn't argue. She didn't plead. There was nothing left to say. She nodded numbly, turned to Stone, and managed a small, watery smile. "Thank you for everything." She began to walk toward the staff lockers, her steps heavy, each one an effort of will. She was preparing to face the storm, to walk home and hold her son and figure out how to survive the unsurvivable. "She's not going anywhere." Stone's voice cut through the darkness, no longer weary but ringing with an authority that was absolute. He rose from the booth, a towering figure even in the dim light. The beam of Henderson's flashlight found his face, and for the first time, Henderson saw not a biker, but something else. Something powerful and dangerous. "And neither are you," Stone said, his voice dropping to a dangerously calm level. He took a step forward, and Henderson involuntarily took a step back. "You're going to turn the lights back on. You're going to get back behind that counter, and you're going to pour this woman a cup of coffee. And then you're going to listen." One of the other men from the booth, a man with a thick beard, produced a high-powered flashlight from his jacket, flooding the area with clean, white light. Another pulled out a satellite phone. "Get me David Chen," he said into the receiver. "Legal department. Yes, now." Mr. Henderson's jaw hung open, his face a comical mask of confusion and fear. Who are you?" he stammered. Stone ignored him, his attention focused entirely on Ilara. He walked over to her, his expression softening. "My daughter told me an angel saved her life once," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've spent the last year looking for her." He gently touched the stone at her neck. "I've found her." The cascade began not with a flood, but with a quiet phone call in the dark. The man on the sat phone, whose name was Jax, spoke in low, clipped tones. Mr. Thorne requires a full asset acquisition. Henderson's Greasy Spoon, LLC. Yes, the entire property and the land it sits on. Price is not a factor. Mr. Henderson, who had been sputtering about trespassers and calling the police, fell silent. His flashlight beam wavered. Thorne, he whispered, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. As in, Marcus Thorne, Thorne Industries? Stone, or rather Marcus Thorne, never took his eyes off Alara. My daughter Lily loved diners like this, he said softly, his voice for her alone. She said they felt honest. The man on the phone, Jax, ended his call. The initial transfer is complete, sir. The holding company will finalize the paperwork in the morning. You are now the owner of this establishment. Marcus nodded. He then turned his attention to a stunned Mr. Henderson. You're fired, he said. The words simple, clean, and devastating. He then looked at Silas's business card, still sitting on the counter. He picked it up and handed it to Jax. Find out who holds the debt on Ms. Alara Vance's apartment building. Buy the building, and find out everything you can about this Silas and his agency. I have a feeling their business practices won't stand up to scrutiny. Jax simply nodded. On it. The power chose that moment to flicker back on, the fluorescent lights humming to life with a startling buzz. The scene was frozen for a moment. Marcus Thorne, a billionaire in biker's leather, standing in the center of a dingy diner, a terrified Mr. Henderson, now an ex-owner, and Alara standing by the lockers, her entire world having shattered and reformed in the span of 10 minutes. Marcus walked over to her. The first thing we're going to do, he said gently, is get you a new pair of shoes. The next few hours were a blur. A sleek black SUV, seemingly impervious to the storm, arrived with a woman in a sharp suit, carrying a laptop and a folder of documents. She was the lawyer, and she efficiently and ruthlessly handled the transfer of ownership, the dismissal of Henderson, and the initial wiring of funds. Ilara's debts, from her rent to a long-forgotten medical bill, were erased with a few keystrokes. A local real estate agent was woken up, and upon hearing the name Marcus Thorne, was more than happy to facilitate the immediate all-cash purchase of a charming, fully furnished 3-bedroom house on the other side of town, the one with the big oak tree in the front yard that Alara always admired when she walked Leo to the park. A trust was established in Leo's name, enough to cover any medical need he would ever have, and his education through to whatever university he chose. It was overwhelming, a tidal wave of fortune that left Alara breathless. Through it all, Marcus was a quiet, steady presence. He explained about Lily, about his search, about how Alara's simple act of kindness had given him 2 more years with his daughter. You can't put a price on that, he said, his gray eyes shining with unshed tears. But I can make sure you never have to worry about the price of anything ever again. News travels fast in a small town, and by morning, the story of the Greasy Spoon was on everyone's lips. It was a modern-day fairy tale. The story of the mean boss, the kind waitress, and the billionaire biker who came to set things right. Mr. Henderson became a pariah overnight, a walking symbol of small-minded prejudice. The truckers and Mr. Abernathy, who had witnessed the whole thing, became local celebrities, recounting the tale to anyone who would listen, their version growing more heroic with each telling. When the diner reopened 2 days later, the sign outside was new. In elegant, warm script, it read, Lily's Place. The inside had been cleaned, the torn vinyl on the booths replaced, and the lights no longer flickered. Ilara was behind the counter, not as a waitress, but as the manager and proprietor. Marcus had insisted. "It's yours," he'd said. "Run it how you see fit." The town, shamed by its previous judgment, showed up in droves. They packed the diner, leaving extravagant tips and offering words of support. They saw Ilara not as the poor, struggling woman, but as a hero. They saw the bikers, who were now permanent fixtures in the back booth, not as threats, but as guardians. They became Ilara's family, watching over her and Leo, their loyalty as fierce and unyielding as their leather jackets. They were uncles to Leo, fixing his bike and teaching him how to skip stones. They were brothers to Ilara, ensuring no one ever looked at her with anything less than respect again. 1 year later, the snow fell again, but this time it was different. It was a gentle, blanketing snow, the kind that promised peace, not peril. Inside Lily's place, the air was warm and filled with laughter. Leo, healthy and vibrant, sat in the back booth doing his homework, a plate of fries at his elbow, while Jax quizzed him on his multiplication tables. Ilara moved through the bustling diner, a genuine smile gracing her lips. She wore a stylish but comfortable dress, and her shoes were sturdy and warm. The stone necklace, Lily's lucky stone, was still there, a constant reminder of the impossible journey that had brought her here. She paused and looked out the window at the falling snow, her heart full. Marcus Thorne sat at the counter, nursing a cup of coffee, watching her with a fond, paternal pride. He was a regular now, his visits a quiet pilgrimage to the place where he had finally found his daughter's angel. Ilara knew she hadn't changed. She was still the woman who would give her last $40 to a stranger in need. What had changed was the world around her, which was finally forced to see the value in a currency it had long ignored. A simple act of kindness, offered without expectation of reward, can ripple through time and change the world, proving that the brightest lights are often found in the darkest of storms. We hope this story touched your heart. If you believe in the power of kindness, please like this video and share it with someone who needs a little hope